Let's look at taking a loan out on a home. Typically, this is the biggest one-time purchase that most people make, is a home. Although surveys have shown that the average American spends more in a lifetime on vehicles than they do on residences, which I thought was interesting. But let's say we buy a home that sells for $90,000 and we put a $5,000 down payment on that home. Then we would subtract the down payment from the selling price, and that would mean that's how much we have to borrow. So we'd be borrowing $85,000. That would be our loan amount. That would be the principal amount of the loan. Now, they're going to ask us several questions. Number one, let's find the monthly payment on this 30-year note. We're going to find the monthly payment. Whenever we find a monthly payment, we're always going to use a table. We're always going to use a table because it involves that compound interest over a long period of time. It's very difficult to figure manually. It would take too long. So let's go to the amortization table on page 374 and 375. This is exactly like the table we saw in chapter 14. Notice it says mortgage principal and interest per 1,000. The difference is that the table in chapter 14 was in months, wasn't it? It was 12 months, 18 months, 36 months. This table is in years, because typically it takes most people a number of years to pay off a loan this substantial. So we look under the number of years, so that's row 30, and under 5%, and when we look under these row and column, our table factor is what? 568. Now what does that mean? That means if we were going to borrow $1,000 at 5.5% for 30 years, we'd pay $5.68 a month for 30 years to pay it off. Okay? To borrow $1,000. Now, how many thousands are we borrowing? We divide our loan amount by 1,000. We're borrowing 85 of those $1,000 chunks. So we're going to multiply this table factor. Remember, a table factor is always multiplied times something. We're going to multiply that times 85, and that's going to be our monthly payment. To the nearest penny, I get $482.80. Does that look right? That would be our monthly payment. So that's one thing that we need to know how to do, is find a monthly payment. I do have a spreadsheet on the website that allows you to figure out payments real easily. You just punch in the different numbers, the interest rate, the length of time. I've also got something on there that shows you an amortization schedule. So don't pay anybody $35 to print an amortization schedule for you. You can just use that spreadsheet and print it yourself or look at it. Okay, so here's our monthly payment. Now another question they'll ask us is, what's the total interest we're going to pay for this home over the life of the loan? Assuming we stay in that house for 30 years, how much interest total would we be paying on this loan? Well, we're going to use the same idea that we use when we're figuring the total finance charge with the car. We're going to say, what's our total payments? That's the total amount of dollars we shelled out. But how much did we actually borrow? That much. The difference is going to be the interest. So if we borrow money for 30 years and we make monthly payments, how many payments are we going to make in 30 years? We're going to multiply this by 12, aren't we? We're going to make 360 of these payments. Okay? On a 30-year loan, we're making 360 payments. So let's multiply 360 times this number, and that's going to be the total amount of payments that we spend in 30 years. I get $173,808. Does that look right? Now that's not interest. That's total payments. Okay? That's principal and interest. Because remember, when we looked at that amortization schedule, when you make a payment, every penny of it either has to go to interest or to principal. That's the only two places it can go. So this is all our interest plus all our principal. Well, what was all our principal? It was $85,000, wasn't it? That's how much we borrowed. So let's subtract our $85,000. That's our principal, our loan amount. And the difference is going to be our total interest on that home. Looks like lots of eights. That's our total interest. Notice it was a little bit more than the principal. Now, that's actually very, very good. That's a very good ratio because this is a very low interest rate. 5.5% is very low. Now, in recent years, it has gotten that low. It's up, what, around 6.5 now? But, you know, in my lifetime, it's been as high as 14, 15, 17% interest back in the late 70s, early 80s, where we had double-digit inflation. Now, typically, if you borrow at 9 to 10%, if you borrow for 30 years, you're going to pay for the house 3 times. Now, this was 30 years, and we basically just paid for it twice. So that's really good. Typically, you have to get a 15-year loan to pay for it twice. All right? Let's look at this same loan for 15 years.